The divorce papers felt heavy in my hand as I stared at my husband across the kitchen island. I was not trembling from grief or a broken heart. I was using every ounce of my self-control to keep from bursting into loud, uncontrollable laughter. "I will just take my personal belongings with me," I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat. The young woman standing slightly behind him let out an impatient sigh, her eyes already mapping out how she would redecorate my custom living room. She had no idea what was coming. She did not know that empty houses tell no lies. Before I dive into exactly what happened next, let me know what city you are watching from in the comments below. And hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic partner who severely underestimated your true worth. My name is Nia, and I am 32 years old. For the past 5 years, I believed my husband Marcus and I were building an untouchable empire together in Atlanta. When we first met, Marcus was a junior financial advisor drowning in student debt and wearing off-the-rack suits that did not quite fit his ambitious ego. I was 27, running a boutique event design firm, working 16-hour days to establish myself in a highly competitive market. I fell in love with his drive. I saw a brilliant black man who wanted to conquer the corporate world, and I decided to be the silent architect behind his throne. When we got married, I made a conscious choice to step out of the spotlight. I scaled back my public presence to polish his. I became the ultimate corporate wife. I styled his wardrobe, preparing him to walk into boardrooms looking like he belonged there. I stayed up until 2 in the morning editing his financial presentations so he would sound flawless the next day. I hosted immaculate dinner parties for senior partners at our home, smoothing out his rough edges and teaching him how to navigate rooms filled with generational wealth. I poured my energy into his career because I believed his promotions were our joint victories. He recently made senior wealth manager, and the ego boost was astronomical. I thought we had finally reached the summit we had been climbing toward together. Today was our 5th wedding anniversary. I spent the entire morning preparing a romantic evening in our sprawling $1.5 million home in the affluent northern suburbs. I was standing in the center of the kitchen, admiring the imported Italian marble countertops, the custom brass fixtures, and the dramatic ambient lighting I had painstakingly selected. I was wearing a silk slip dress, waiting to celebrate half a decade of partnership. Then the front door clicked open. Marcus did not call out my name. He did not walk in holding anniversary flowers. He marched straight into the kitchen and slammed a thick manila envelope onto the marble island. The sharp smack echoed through the high ceilings of the open-concept living space. "Sign them, Nia," he demanded. His voice was cold and clipped, completely devoid of the warmth I had nurtured for 5 years. I looked down at the envelope and read the bold print of a law firm I recognized. Divorce proceedings. My eyes flicked up to his face. He stood there in a bespoke, tailored suit that I had personally selected and paid for, his posture rigid with arrogant defiance. "I want you out of my house by tomorrow evening," Marcus said, crossing his arms over his chest. "I am not going to drag this out, and I am not going to negotiate. I have outgrown this marriage, and quite frankly, I have outgrown you. I need a partner who matches my current status in the financial world. You have spent the last 5 years playing around with your little decorating hobbies while I carried the heavy financial weight of this entire family. I am done pretending we are equals." The sheer audacity of his words hung in the air. My little decorating hobbies. That was how he dismissed the grueling design work I did. He honestly believed that his corporate salary was the sole pillar holding up our luxury lifestyle. He looked at me with absolute contempt, fully convinced that he was the king of a castle he had conquered all by himself. "This house is in my name," Marcus continued, taking a step closer to the island to assert his dominance. "The mortgage is paid from my personal checking account every single month. I earned this lifestyle. I put in the long hours at the firm. I secured the high net worth clients. You just got to live here and pick out matching curtains. I will be damned if I let you drag out a legal battle to take half of what I built from the ground up. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your clothes and whatever cheap trinkets you brought into this marriage. Leave the house keys on the counter when you go." He stared at me, waiting for the tears to fall. He was waiting for me to collapse onto the floor to beg him to reconsider, to ask what I had done wrong to deserve this on our anniversary. He wanted the twisted satisfaction of watching me break under the weight of his perceived power. He wanted to feel like a god casting out a peasant. Instead, I simply looked at him. I looked at the man whose career I had quietly orchestrated behind the scenes. I looked at the man who thought the monthly transfers from his bank account were actually paying off a traditional bank loan. He was standing in a house filled with custom Italian furniture, limited edition art pieces, and high-end smart appliances, acting as if his paycheck could cover even a fraction of what surrounded him. I reached for the pen resting near the envelope. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I did not tell him that he was making the biggest mistake of his life. I just prepared to give him exactly what he asked for. I pressed the pen firmly against the paper and signed my name on the dotted line. The scratching sound of ink on parchment felt remarkably loud in the sudden silence of the kitchen. Marcus let out a harsh breath, pushing his shoulders back as if he had just conquered a major battlefield. He thought he had won. He thought my quiet compliance was a sign of total defeat. That was the exact moment Jasmine decided to step fully into the light. She unlinked her arm from Marcus and began to walk around my home. Her designer knockoff heels clicked sharply against the imported Brazilian hardwood floors. She moved with the exaggerated arrogance of a woman who believed she had just secured a lifelong winning lottery ticket. She strolled past the kitchen island and descended the 2 steps into the main living room. I watched her run her manicured hands over the back of my custom Italian leather sofa. She traced the edges of the imported side tables and looked up at the vaulted ceilings. "You know, Marcus," she said, her voice pitched artificially high to make sure I heard every single word. "We are going to have to change almost everything in here. The aesthetic is just so heavy and outdated. It feels like an old museum. I want to rip down these dark drapes and bring in some light, airy pieces. We need to make it feel young and vibrant, make it reflect our energy." Marcus smiled at her with sickening devotion. "Whatever you want, baby," he replied. "You are the woman of the house now. You get to call the shots." Jasmine turned to face me. She placed her hands on her hips, tilting her head with a look of mock pity that made my blood run cold. "Do not look so sad, Nia," she said. "You had a good run. You got to live in a $1 million mansion for 5 years. Most women with your background never even get to step foot inside a gated community like this one. You should be thanking Marcus for giving you a taste of the high life." I leaned back against the marble counter, crossing my ankles. I kept my face completely blank, letting her words bounce off me like rain on glass. "You think he gave me this life?" I asked, my voice quiet and steady. Jasmine scoffed, tossing her long extensions over her shoulder. "Please," she laughed. "We all know Marcus is the breadwinner. He makes the real money at the firm while you play around with your little decorating business. He pays the mortgage, he pays the bills. He bought all of this. You were just lucky enough to be along for the ride. But now the ride is over." She walked over to the custom-built media console and picked up a framed photograph of Marcus and me from our honeymoon. She stared at it for a second, before casually placing it face down on the polished wood. "I have already talked to Marcus about the transition." Jasmine continued pacing across the vintage Persian rug. "You can take your clothes and your personal toiletries. We know you mostly wear sensible business casual anyway, so it should not take you long to pack. But the furniture stays. The electronics stay. The art stays. We are going to keep the foundational pieces until I have time to hire a real interior designer to redo the whole place. It is time for this house to reflect the people who actually pay for it." I looked at this 26-year-old girl. She was wearing a dress I recognized from a fast fashion website, accessorized with a handbag I knew Marcus had purchased for her last month because I managed the credit card statements. She was completely blinded by the illusion of luxury she thought Marcus was providing. She saw a successful black man in a tailored suit standing in a mansion, and she calculated her price without ever checking the math. "A real interior designer," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "That sounds like a wonderful idea, Jasmine. You should definitely hire someone who understands the true cost of luxury. Someone who knows exactly how much it costs to fill a 6,000 square foot home with imported goods. She rolled her eyes, walking back up the steps toward the kitchen. I will. Marcus has already given me a generous budget to freshen the place up. You have to admit it must be exhausting trying to pretend you belong in a house like this when you are just scraping by with your event planning gigs. Do not try to sneak anything out of here that does not belong to you, Nia. I will be checking the inventory before you leave tomorrow. Marcus stepped forward, wanting to assert his dominance one last time. You heard her, Nia, he commanded. I am not going to argue with you about who owns what. The financial division is clearly outlined in those papers you just signed. You get what you came with, which was practically nothing, and I keep my assets. Be out by 6 o'clock tomorrow evening. I do not want to see your face when I get home from the office. Have your bags packed and leave the house keys on the counter. I looked from Marcus to Jasmine. The sheer arrogance radiating from both of them was almost intoxicating because it made my next moves so much easier. They were handing me the perfect execution on a silver platter. You know, Jasmine, I said, pushing off the counter and walking slowly toward the center of the room. People often mistake a house for a home. They see the marble countertops, the custom velvet armchairs, the smart home integration, and they think the man standing in the middle of it all must be a king. Jasmine glared at me. He is a king, she snapped, and he is kicking you out of his castle. I stopped a few feet away from her, looking directly into her eyes and letting the cold reality of my gaze pierce through her smug facade. A king needs a kingdom, Jasmine, I said softly. But what you are looking at right now is just a stage, and actors rarely own the props they use to impress their audience. She frowned, her brow furrowing as she tried to decipher my meaning. You are just bitter, she said, taking a step closer to Marcus. You are trying to sound smart because you are getting thrown out on the street. Just remember what I said. Leave the furniture. Oh, I promise you, Jasmine, I said, my smile widening into something dangerous and sharp. I will not take a single thing that does not rightfully belong to me. I will pack my sensible clothes. I will take my personal paperwork. And I will leave you and Marcus exactly what you both have earned. Marcus grabbed Jasmine by the hand, pulling her toward the front door. Come on, baby, let us go celebrate. We are wasting our breath on her. She is just trying to have the last word. Jasmine leaned into him, shooting me one last victorious glare over her shoulder. Bye, Nia. Good luck finding a cheap apartment. Maybe you can decorate it with some nice throw pillows from the discount store. The heavy oak front door slammed shut behind them, leaving me alone in the quiet kitchen. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the silence of the massive house. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I scrolled past my contacts and found the number for my logistics manager. I pressed call and waited for him to answer. The storm was ready to break, and I was about to wash their perfect illusion right out the front door. Derek answered on the second ring. His voice was thick with sleep, but immediately shifted into professional mode when he heard my breathing. I need an emergency extraction, I said, my tone leaving no room for questions. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp. What is the location? He asked, typing loudly on his keyboard. My house, I replied. The staging contract for Marcus is terminated due to a breach of terms. We are pulling everything. Derek paused, the clicking of his keyboard stopping abruptly. Everything, Nia, that is a 6,000 square foot premium tier package. We will need 5 trucks and a 10-man crew to clear that property by noon. Then authorize the overtime and get the biggest trucks we have in the fleet. I want this place stripped down to the studs. If it is not bolted to the foundation, it goes into the back of a truck. Every sofa, every rug, every piece of abstract art, and every smart appliance. Understood, Derek said, his voice sharp and focused. We will be at the gate by 7:45. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the marble counter. The sound was a definitive sharp crack in the silent kitchen. I walked over to the custom wine fridge, pulled out a bottle of expensive Cabernet, and poured myself a glass in one of the heavy crystal goblets Jasmine had just been admiring. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the rich flavor ground me. The house was completely silent, but it felt incredibly alive. Every piece of furniture, every silk drape, every carefully placed decor item held a secret that Marcus was entirely oblivious to. He truly believed his six-figure corporate salary funded this lavish lifestyle. He actually thought that paying the monthly mortgage on this property entitled him to absolute ownership of the luxury inside it. He was a senior wealth manager who ironically never bothered to read the fine print of his own life. 5 years ago, when we first moved into this neighborhood, Marcus was desperate to project an image of generational wealth to his senior partners. He wanted to host elite dinners for clients who drove luxury cars and vacationed in exclusive resorts. But behind closed doors, he was drowning in personal debt from his flashy car lease and his endless rotation of bespoke suits. He absolutely could not afford to furnish a mansion. So I did what any supportive wife with a rapidly growing luxury staging company would do. I staged our own home to make him look like a king. I drafted a formal corporate contract between my company, Aura Lux Staging and Procurement, and Marcus. I furnished the entire estate using top-tier premium inventory straight from my commercial warehouse. To Marcus, it was just a convenient formality, a clever way for me to write off the expensive furniture as a business tax expense. He signed the staging contract without ever reading the termination clause. He never realized that legally, he did not own a single teaspoon in this designer kitchen. It was all corporate inventory. And corporate inventory can be recalled by the CEO at any given moment. I set my wine glass down and walked upstairs to the master bedroom to pack. Jasmine had mockingly told me to take my sensible clothes and leave the rest. I happily obliged. I pulled my single black suitcase from the top shelf of the walk-in closet. I packed my tailored blazers, my silk blouses, and a few pairs of practical shoes. I packed my laptop, my chargers, and my business documents. I left my diamond wedding ring resting on the bedside table, right next to the framed vows we had spoken 5 years ago. I did not shed a single tear as I zipped the suitcase closed. Grief requires loss, and I was not losing a husband today. I was shedding a massive financial and emotional liability. I walked back out into the dark hallway, running my fingers over the velvet upholstery of a lounge chair. Tomorrow, this space would be a hollow, echoing shell. Marcus wanted a partner who matched his elevated status. He was about to find out exactly what his real status was without my capital subsidizing his fragile ego. I knew Marcus well enough to know he would not just trust me to pack up and leave quietly. He was too arrogant and entirely too paranoid for that. He would want an audience for my humiliating departure. He would want witnesses to ensure I did not steal any of his precious belongings before the 6 o'clock deadline. He would undoubtedly send his mother and his sister to supervise my eviction. His mother, Beatrice, was a prominent socialite in her church community, who had always looked down on my background. She constantly bragged about her son, the financial genius, while dismissing my business as a cute little project. Then there was his sister Tara and her white husband Connor. Connor was a stockbroker who loved to lecture me about cash flow and wealth management at every family barbecue, acting as if his presence elevated our family standing. They all fed off Marcus and his perceived wealth. They all believed the illusion I had built for him. Let them come. I wanted them to have front row seats to the show. I wanted his entire enabling family standing in the middle of this living room when the trucks arrived. I wanted them to watch his fake kingdom crumble into dust. I walked back down to the kitchen and washed my crystal wine glass, drying it completely before placing it carefully back into the illuminated glass cabinet. It would be wrapped in protective foam and packed away in a company box by tomorrow afternoon. I grabbed a blanket and laid down on the bare mattress of the guest room, fully dressed, waiting for the sun to rise. The digital clock on the nightstand clicked to 3 in the morning. 5 hours until Derek and the crew arrived at the front gate. 5 hours until the flawless illusion shattered completely, and the reality of my power crashed down on all of them. The heavy oak door swung open and in marched Beatrice. My mother-in-law was dressed as if she were attending a high society church luncheon, wearing a pristine cream-colored tweed suit and her signature pearls. She stepped onto the Brazilian hardwood floor with an air of absolute authority, sweeping her gaze across the room to locate me. Right behind her was Tara, my sister-in-law, clutching a designer handbag that Marcus had bought for her last Christmas. Bringing up the rear was Connor. Tara's husband was a white stockbroker who always walked into our home as if his mere presence elevated the property value. He wore his usual arrogant smirk and a blue dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, projecting the image of a Wall Street elite, gracing us with his weekend casual look. "I see you are actually packed," Beatrice announced, her eyes landing on my single black suitcase resting near the front door. She let out a sharp, condescending laugh that echoed in the grand entryway. "Is that really it, Nia? 5 years in this magnificent house, and all you have to show for it is one piece of luggage. I suppose you can only carry so many cheap blazers and crafting supplies." I took a slow sip from my paper cup, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "I am traveling light today, Beatrice. I prefer to only carry what holds real value." Beatrice scoffed, walking past me into the living room. She ran her hand approvingly over the custom velvet sofa, clearly admiring the luxury she believed her son had purchased. "Well, it is for the best," she said, not looking back at me. "Marcus needs a clean break. He needs a woman who actually fits the lifestyle he has built. Jasmine is a breath of fresh air. She comes from a proper legacy family. Her father is a federal judge, you know. She has that refined, elegant look. Lighter features, softer hair, a much more polished pedigree. She understands high society. You always had too much edge, Nia. Too dark, too loud, too wrapped up in that working-class hustle. You never truly fit into a family of our prestige." The blatant colorism and classism dripping from her words was nothing new. For 5 years, Beatrice had made sure to remind me that my dark skin and my self-made business background were somehow a stain on their carefully manufactured upper-class image. She idolized Jasmine because Jasmine fit her outdated, toxic standard of what a successful black man should have on his arm. A lighter-skinned trophy wife who knew how to smile quietly and host charity galas. Tara chimed in, stepping up beside her mother. "Do not take it personally, Nia. We are just here to make sure the transition is smooth. Marcus asked us to supervise your exit. He wants to make sure you do not accidentally pack any of his valuables. You know how emotional these situations can get. People tend to take things that do not belong to them when they feel slighted." I looked at Tara. She was wearing a diamond tennis bracelet that I had secured at a wholesale discount for Marcus to gift her, but she fully believed her brother had paid retail price at a luxury boutique to spoil her. "I assure you, Tara," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion, "I have no intention of taking a single item that belongs to Marcus. I am leaving him exactly what he has earned." Connor let out a loud, arrogant chuckle as he leaned against the marble kitchen island. He crossed his arms, looking me up and down with absolute disdain. "You should be down on your knees thanking him, Nia," he said, his voice laced with the kind of unearned confidence only a mediocre finance bro could muster. "Marcus is being incredibly generous by giving you a 24-hour notice. Legally speaking, he could have had the police escort you off the premises last night. You have absolutely no equity in this property. As someone who actually handles wealth management for a living, I can tell you that you played this marriage completely wrong. You women who do these little creative arts and crafts jobs never understand cash flow. You let him put the deed in his name. You let him control the mortgage. He supported you for 5 years, and now you are walking away with zero assets. It is a harsh lesson in basic economics, but maybe next time you will learn to read a contract." I stared at Connor. He stood there in my kitchen, leaning on my custom-installed marble island, lecturing me about wealth management and contracts. This was the same man who constantly boasted about his elite investment portfolio at family dinners. The same man who believed he was the smartest person in any room simply because of his race and his job title. He thought he was educating a naive, emotional woman who had just been discarded by her wealthy husband. "You are absolutely right, Connor," I said, offering him a brief, chilling smile. "Reading the fine print of a contract is the most important rule in wealth management. It is a shame how many men sign legally binding documents without understanding the actual terms of the agreement." Connor frowned slightly, his arrogant smirk faltering for a fraction of a second before he recovered his posture. "Well, at least you are finally admitting it. Just grab your bag and head out, Nia. We have a cleaning crew coming at 9 to prep the house for Jasmine. She wants to clear out any lingering energy before she starts picking out new throw pillows. Beatrice nodded in agreement, turning to face me with a look of finality. Jasmine is going to host the spring gala right here in this living room next month. She already knows how to arrange a proper seating chart without making it look like a cheap wedding reception. It is a new era for Marcus. Do yourself a favor and do not make a scene on your way out. Just call a cab and leave with your dignity intact. I checked the gold watch on my wrist. It was 7:35. The heavy trucks would be pulling up to the security gate in exactly 10 minutes. I took another sip of my coffee, relishing the bitter taste. I am not quite ready to leave yet, Beatrice, I said casually, setting the paper cup down on the counter. I am waiting for my transportation to arrive. Tara crossed her arms, looking annoyed. Nia, do not drag this out. Marcus wants you gone before he leaves for the office. We are not going to stand here all morning watching you stall. If you cannot afford a premium rideshare service, Connor can give you $20 for a standard taxi. Just get your suitcase and go. I picked up my suitcase by the handle, not to leave, but to move it safely out of the main walkway. I do not need your money, Connor, I said, keeping my eyes locked on the front window. And I am not stalling, Tara. I am just making sure the transition is as thorough as Marcus requested. He wanted a clean break. I am going to give him a spotless one. Beatrice shook her head, muttering something under her breath about my stubborn working-class attitude. She walked over to the custom velvet lounge chair and sat down, making herself comfortable in her son's supposed kingdom. Connor pulled out his phone, checking his stocks, completely unbothered by the lives he thought he was ruining. They were so comfortable in their arrogance. They were so completely blind to the reality of the ground they were standing on. The silence in the room stretched thick and heavy. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the tears, the begging, the dramatic exit that would validate their superiority. I gave them nothing but steady, unnerving eye contact. I watched the digital clock on the smart oven tick forward minute by minute. 7:40, 7:41, 7:42. The stage was set, the audience was seated in the front row, and the opening act of their destruction was rolling down the street right on schedule. I stood in the foyer of my own making, ready to show them exactly what happens when you mistake a quiet architect for a powerless pawn. The digital clock on the smart oven ticked to 7:43. The heavy, suffocating silence in the room was apparently too much for Connor to handle. A man like Connor could never stand quietly in a room where he felt superior. He needed to hear his own voice. He needed to make sure everyone else recognized his self-appointed dominance. He pushed off the marble island and walked over to the built-in espresso machine. He began pressing buttons with casual familiarity, acting as if he had paid for the appliance himself. You know, Nia, he began over the low hum of the coffee grinder. It is actually fascinating watching you stand there like you have won some sort of moral victory. It really is a classic psychological defense mechanism. You have zero liquidity, zero scalable equity, and zero leverage, but you are standing there guarding a single suitcase like it is a treasure chest. I kept my eyes fixed on the front window, but I allowed a faint, amused smile to touch my lips. Connor took my silence as an invitation to continue his unsolicited masterclass. Marcus made the right call, liquidating a bad investment. Connor continued, taking a sip of his freshly brewed espresso. In wealth management, we have a rule about cutting losses. You do not hold on to an underperforming asset just because you spent 5 years trying to make it work. You were a bad investment, Nia. You run a little party planning hustle. You arrange flowers and pick out tablecloths. That is not a business. That is a hobby with a tax ID number. Tara nodded eagerly from her spot next to her mother. Exactly. You never scaled. Marcus told us your profit margins were a joke. Connor held up a hand, silencing his wife so he could finish his sermon. It is a systemic issue, really. Black women, especially in these creative hustle culture fields, prioritize aesthetics over actual wealth generation. You buy a nice tailored blazer, you put on a bold lip, and you think you are playing in the big leagues. But you do not know the first thing about capital gains, diversifying a portfolio, or building institutional wealth. You just consume. You do not generate. Marcus tried to elevate you. He brought you into a world of high net worth individuals, but you cannot teach financial literacy to someone who only understands color palettes and table centerpieces. The blatant racism wrapped in financial jargon was so thick you could choke on it. He stood there, a mediocre white man, who had married into a moderately successful black family, using his license as a stockbroker to belittle a black woman who had actually built a business from the ground up. He looked at Jasmine, who had completely bought into this toxic narrative, and he saw the kind of black woman he and Marcus respected, one who relied on a man for status. I finally turned my head away from the window and looked directly at Connor. I did not raise my voice. I did not let a single ounce of anger show on my face. Anger was an emotion reserved for equals, and Connor was far beneath me. Asset allocation. I said, my voice smooth and perfectly modulated. Capital gains, institutional wealth, fiduciary duty. Those are excellent terms, Connor. You articulate them so well. It almost sounds like you know what they mean in practice. Connor let out a short, patronizing laugh. I handle multi-million-dollar portfolios for a living, Nia. I think I know how money works. I took a slow step away from my suitcase, moving closer to the kitchen island. I stopped just a few feet away from him. I am sure you do, I said, maintaining unwavering eye contact. In fact, I have always been deeply fascinated by your creative investment strategies, Connor, especially the way you handle internal family assets. It requires a very unique understanding of cash flow. Connor's patronizing smile faltered just a fraction of an inch. His eyes darted to my face, searching for the angle. I turned my head slightly to look at my mother-in-law, who was still sitting comfortably on the velvet lounge chair. Beatrice, what I asked, keeping my tone light and conversational. Did you know Connor was explaining his offshore investment theories to Marcus late last month? It sounded incredibly complex. Something about rerouting traditional pension funds into high-yield shell accounts to avoid domestic tax liabilities. Beatrice frowned, looking confusedly between me and her son-in-law. Offshore accounts. Connor, what is she talking about? My retirement fund is sitting in domestic blue-chip stocks, just like my late husband set it up. You told me it was completely secure. Connor swallowed hard. I saw his Adam's apple bob nervously. He set his espresso cup down on the counter with a sharp clatter. The effortless arrogance he had been projecting just 30 seconds ago vanished instantly. I do not know what you are talking about, he said, his voice suddenly tight and defensive. That was a private conversation about hypothetical market trends. You clearly misunderstood the financial terminology, Nia. Like I said, you do not understand these concepts. Hypothetical? I repeated, dragging the word out slowly. Of course it was hypothetical, because liquidating your mother-in-law's conservative retirement portfolio and moving $600,000 into an unregistered LLC called Apex Global Holdings, based out of the Cayman Islands, would be a massive breach of fiduciary duty, not to mention a textbook case of federal wire fraud. The silence that fell over the room this time was entirely different. It was not the silence of arrogant expectation. It was the suffocating silence of panic. Connor's face went chalk white. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and small under the bright kitchen pendant lights. He took a step toward me, his hands raising instinctively, as if he wanted to physically cover my mouth. "Shut up!" he hissed, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "You do not know anything about Apex. You are making things up because you are bitter." Tara stood up, her designer handbag slipping from her shoulder to the floor. "Connor," she said, her voice trembling. "What is Apex Global Holdings? Why is she talking about my mother's retirement money?" "Do not listen to her, Tara," Connor snapped, turning to face his wife. He was sweating now. Tiny beads of moisture had formed on his forehead. "She is just trying to start trouble. She is a vindictive woman who is getting thrown out on the street, and she wants to drag us down with her." "Beatrice, I swear to you your money is perfectly safe. The market has just been a little volatile lately." I leaned against the marble counter, mirroring the exact posture Connor had assumed when he was lecturing me. "Volatile is a great word, Connor," I said, my voice cutting through his frantic excuses. "The crypto market is incredibly volatile, especially when you bypass legal trading platforms and funnel your clients' money into unregulated digital tokens, hoping to cover the massive losses you took last quarter. It is a bold strategy for wealth generation. I am sure the Securities and Exchange Commission would find your innovative approach to cash flow absolutely fascinating. Connor looked like he was about to vomit. He gripped the edge of the marble island, his knuckles turning white. He knew I had him. He knew that I did not just overhear a passing conversation. As someone who managed the financial logistics of a multi-million-dollar corporate staging company, I knew exactly how to read a bank statement. I had seen the encrypted emails Marcus had carelessly left open on his home office computer. Marcus had been helping Connor forge the domestic tax documents to cover the missing funds. Beatrice stood up from the lounge chair, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. Her chest was heaving with sudden panic. "Connor, look at me," she demanded, her voice shrill. "Did you touch my retirement money? Did you move my funds without my authorization?" Connor could not look at her. He stared at the floor, breathing heavily. "Beatrice, I can explain," he stammered. "It was a temporary reallocation to maximize your returns." Marcus approved the strategy. Marcus signed off on it. Tara let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth with her hands. "Oh my God, Connor! You stole from my mother! I did not steal anything!" He shouted, his composure completely shattered. "It is an investment. The market is just down right now. It will bounce back." I smiled, stepping away from the counter and walking back to my single black suitcase. "Just a temporary dip in liquidity, right, Connor?" I said, smoothing the lapel of my blazer. "I suppose that is the harsh lesson in basic economics you were talking about. It is a shame how many people trust white-collar criminals simply because they wear a nice shirt and speak with unearned confidence. But please do not let my creative arts and crafts brain interrupt your family bonding time. I was just making conversation while I wait for my ride." The digital clock ticked to 7:45. Right on cue, the heavy rhythmic rumbling of massive diesel engines vibrated through the floorboards of the house. The sound was unmistakable. It was not a single delivery van. It was a convoy of heavy-duty commercial trucks pulling up to the front curb. I gripped the handle of my suitcase and looked at the three of them. Beatrice was hyperventilating, clutching her chest. Tara was screaming at a pale, sweating Connor, demanding to see the portfolio statements immediately. Their fake upper-class solidarity had imploded in less than 3 minutes. The front doorbell rang, a sharp, piercing chime that cut through the chaos in the living room. "My ride is here," I announced, my voice perfectly calm over the sound of Tara crying. "And unlike your retirement funds, Beatrice, my transportation is highly reliable." I turned toward the heavy oak door, ready to welcome my crew and strip this fake kingdom down to its very foundation. As I reached for the brass handle, the heavy oak door swung inward abruptly. Jasmine stepped back into the foyer, holding a steaming cup of artisanal coffee in one hand and a pastry bag in the other. She had a smug, satisfied smirk plastered across her perfectly contoured face. Apparently, Marcus had dropped her back off before heading to his office so she could personally oversee my departure. She wanted to play the undisputed role of the new lady of the house, ordering the former wife out into the cold morning air. "You are still here?" Jasmine asked, taking a slow, deliberate sip of her latte. Her eyes dragged over my tailored outfit with overt disdain. "Marcus assured me you would be gone by the time I grabbed my morning coffee. The premium cleaning crew is going to be here any minute, and I really do not want your negative energy lingering in my new space while they sanitize the house." Beatrice, still clutching her chest from the devastating revelation about her stolen retirement funds, desperately tried to compose herself. The obsessive need to maintain her upper-class facade completely overrode her immediate panic about the missing money. She needed a scapegoat to regain control of the room, and I was the easiest target available. "Just leave, Nia," Beatrice demanded, her voice shaking slightly, but attempting to project matriarchal authority. "We will deal with our internal family financial matters privately. This conversation does not concern you anymore. Take your cheap little suitcase and get off my son's property before we are forced to call the neighborhood security patrol." Tara was glaring daggers at Connor, but she too turned her misdirected hostility toward me. "Get out," Tara snapped, taking a protective step toward her mother. "You have caused enough trouble for one morning. You are just jealous and trying to ruin our family because Marcus threw you away for a younger, beautiful woman who actually fits into his corporate world." Connor remained completely silent, standing frozen by the marble kitchen island, still trapped in the nightmare of his exposed fraud. He knew his elite Wall Street persona had just been incinerated by a black woman he had spent the last 20 minutes belittling. He could not even look at his wife or his mother-in-law. He just stared blankly at the imported floorboards, calculating how much prison time he was facing. Jasmine, oblivious to the massive financial bomb that had just detonated in the kitchen, walked past me with a triumphant, arrogant sway to her hips. She made her way to the center of the sunken living room and gracefully lowered herself onto the custom Italian velvet sofa. She crossed her legs, resting her coffee cup on her knee, and looked at me with absolute tyrannical disdain. "You heard them," Nia Jasmine said, acting as if she were a queen dispensing orders from her throne. "The entire family wants you gone. It is actually getting incredibly embarrassing watching you linger here like a stray dog waiting for scraps of attention. I already told you I am keeping the furniture. There is nothing left for you in this house." The sheer audacity of her sitting on a $30,000 piece of corporate inventory that my company exclusively owned while ordering me out of my own staged production was pure cinematic perfection. I did not feel an ounce of anger or resentment. I felt the pure, unadulterated thrill of a master chess player holding absolute checkmate in her hand. "I am not lingering, Jasmine," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and entirely unbothered. "I am just waiting for my scheduled transportation to arrive. Moving takes a great deal of sophisticated coordination, especially when you are dealing with premium-tier assets." "You have one single suitcase," Jasmine scoffed, pointing a perfectly manicured acrylic nail at my luggage by the door. "Call a standard rideshare and get out. You are ruining my morning peace, and I need to start sketching out my vision for the spring gala. I plan to host the entire executive board right here in this living room next month." The rhythmic rumbling that had been vibrating through the floorboards suddenly amplified, disrupting her delusional monologue. It grew from a distant mechanical hum into a deep, booming roar that physically shook the foundation of the house. A deafening screech of heavy air brakes shattered the tense atmosphere in the living room. The sound was so loud and abrupt that Jasmine visibly flinched, spilling a dark drop of her hot coffee directly onto the pristine velvet upholstery. "What on earth is that horrendous noise?" Beatrice gasped, her hands flying to her ears to block the sound. She moved toward the massive front windows, her pearls clinking wildly against her tweed suit. Tara followed her mother, cautiously peering through the sheer silk curtains. The color completely drained from Tara's face as she took in the massive scene unfolding on their quiet, upscale suburban street. I stepped up to the window, standing right beside my former mother-in-law, to enjoy the view. 5 massive commercial moving trucks were parked in a neat, imposing line directly in front of the manicured estate, blocking the entire street. These were not standard residential moving vans you rent for a weekend. They were heavy-duty commercial freight trucks painted in sleek matte black. On the side of each massive trailer was the bold silver logo of my company, Auralux Staging and Procurement. The heavy metal doors of the lead truck swung open with a loud mechanical clank. Derek, my logistics manager, stepped out, holding a heavy-duty aluminum clipboard. He was wearing his crisp black company polo shirt and looked completely ready for war. Behind him, a highly trained crew of 10 broad-shouldered men wearing matching black company uniforms began pouring out of the vehicles. They moved with absolute military precision, unlatching the heavy metal loading ramps with loud bangs. They began pulling out industrial furniture dollies, thick protective moving blankets, and massive rolls of industrial shrink wrap. The sound of heavy work boots marching up the pristine concrete driveway echoed through the quiet neighborhood, drawing the attention of several wealthy neighbors who peeked out from behind their own curtains. Jasmine stood up from the sofa, her brow furrowed in deep, utter confusion. "Did Marcus order a luxury delivery?" she asked, looking frantically from the imposing trucks outside to Beatrice. "I explicitly told him I wanted to pick out the new pieces myself." Why are there commercial freight trucks blocking our entire driveway? Beatrice stared out the window, her mouth opening and closing without producing a single coherent sound. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the operation happening on her son's pristine front lawn had left her completely speechless. Tara took a terrified step back from the glass, bumping hard into Connor, who had finally unfrozen enough to walk over and see what the massive commotion was about. I grabbed the handle of my single black suitcase, extending the telescopic handle with a sharp click. I turned and smiled at the four of them. The smile was not warm or accommodating. It was a predator baring its teeth right before the final strike. Marcus did not order a delivery, Jasmine. I said, my voice ringing clear and authoritative through the silent, stunned house. I ordered a pickup, and my crew is here to collect every single thing you are currently standing on. I turned my back on their horrified, pale faces and reached out to unlatch the heavy oak front door. I pulled it wide open, letting the crisp morning air and the sound of my advancing crew flood into the foyer. The ultimate eviction was officially underway. Derek stepped across the threshold, wiping his heavy boots on the mat before looking at me with absolute professional focus. "Morning, boss," he said, his voice loud enough to echo into the vaulted living room. "We have the 5 trucks secured and the loading ramps deployed. Where do you want the team to start?" "Everywhere," I replied, stepping aside to let his crew enter. "Start with the main living area and work your way up to the master suite. If it is not bolted to the architectural foundation, it belongs in a truck." The 10 men filed into the grand foyer, moving with terrifying efficiency. They unfolded thick quilted moving blankets and snapped open rolls of industrial shrink wrap. The sound of heavy metal dollies clattering against the Brazilian hardwood floors sent a shockwave of panic through the remaining family members. Jasmine jumped up from the velvet sofa, clutching her coffee cup to her chest, as 2 burly men carrying a massive rolling cart marched directly toward her. Before Beatrice could even open her mouth to scream, a familiar silver Mercedes SUV screeched to a chaotic halt right behind my fleet of commercial trucks. Marcus threw his car door open and sprinted up the driveway, his designer suit jacket flapping wildly behind him. He had obviously found his exit from the gated community, blocked by my logistics team, and rushed back to see what was happening. "What the hell is going on here?" Marcus roared, bursting through the front door and nearly colliding with one of my workers. He looked at the men actively wrapping the expensive imported side tables in protective foam. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. "Get your hands off my property. I will have you all arrested for breaking and entering." He lunged toward Derek, but Derek simply sidestepped him with the calm indifference of a man who handled hostile corporate evictions for a living. Marcus spun around, his chest heaving, as he pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "You think you can just hire a bunch of thugs to rob me blind in broad daylight?" Marcus shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. "I am calling 911 right now. This is a felony, Nia. You are going to prison. You cannot steal my furniture just because you are bitter about the divorce. This is my house. I paid for all of this." I calmly unzipped the front compartment of my black suitcase and pulled out a thick, heavy folder. It was bound with a thick black cord and stamped with a bright red corporate seal. I walked directly up to Marcus, invading his personal space until he was forced to take a step back. I slammed the heavy folder hard into the center of his chest, making him instinctively grab it before it hit the floor. "I am not stealing anything, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous razor-sharp register. "Open the folder. Read the very first line of the document you signed 5 years ago." Marcus glared at me, his breathing erratic, but his eyes darted down to the heavy parchment paper. He flipped the cover open. I watched his eyes scan the bold black ink at the top of the page. "Aura Lux. Staging and Procurement. LLC." He read aloud, his voice faltering slightly as the words failed to compute in his panicked brain. "What is this? This is just some corporate paperwork. This means nothing." "It means everything," I replied, taking a slow step around him so I could address the entire room. "You spent 5 years telling me that my business was a little decorating hobby. You told your elitist friends and your snobby family that I played with color palettes while you generated real wealth. You honestly believed I was just a housewife with a craft project." I am the founder and chief executive officer of Aura Lux. We are a premier commercial staging firm that supplies luxury interiors for high net worth real estate developers. And you, Marcus, are nothing but a client. Jasmine let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth with her free hand. Beatrice sank back onto the staircase, clutching the wooden banister as if her legs could no longer support her. Connor stood perfectly still, his arrogant finance bro persona completely shattered as he finally recognized the terrifying reality of corporate asset management. When we moved into this neighborhood 5 years ago, you were desperate to project the image of a successful Wall Street king. I continued projecting my voice so every single person in the room could hear the pathetic truth. But you were drowning in debt from your leased car, your expensive tailored suits, and the exorbitant country club fees you paid just to network. You absolutely could not afford to furnish $1 million mansion. You begged me to make this house look like generational wealth so you could host your senior partners and secure your promotion. Marcus stared at the document, his hands beginning to shake as the memory of signing it finally resurfaced. So I did what any smart CEO would do, I said, gesturing to the magnificent living room. I drew up a standard corporate staging agreement. Every single item in this house, from the baccarat crystal chandelier in the foyer to the custom smart kitchen appliances, right down to the velvet sofa Jasmine was just claiming as her own, belongs entirely to my company. It is commercial inventory. You did not buy it. You did not finance it. You borrowed it. That is a lie, Marcus yelled, throwing the folder onto the floor. I pay the mortgage. The house is in my name. The house is in your name, I agreed smoothly, but the contents are not. You signed a legally binding corporate lease agreement. Clause 7, Section B specifically states that the staging agreement is immediately rendered void upon termination of the marital contract or eviction of the corporate guarantor. You handed me divorce papers yesterday, Marcus. You demanded I pack my things and leave. You triggered the termination clause yourself. My company is simply reclaiming its assets today. Jasmine looked around the room, her eyes wide with mounting horror. The reality was crashing down on her like an avalanche. The wealthy, sophisticated man she had proudly stolen away from a supposedly inferior woman did not even own his own bed. He was a fraud living in a beautifully constructed movie set, and the director had just called cut. You cannot do this! Marcus stammered, his aggressive posture collapsing into absolute desperation. Nia, you cannot just empty the house. I have a dinner meeting with the firm partners scheduled here for next week. I need this furniture. You are going to ruin me. Derek walked past us carrying a heavy stack of flattened moving boxes. Excuse me, sir, Derek said, barely looking at Marcus. We need you to step aside so we can wrap the foyer console table. Marcus ignored him, lunging forward to grab my arm. I stepped back quickly, my eyes flashing with a warning so intense he immediately dropped his hand. Do not touch me, I said, my voice echoing like ice cracking over a frozen lake. You wanted a partner who matched your elite status, Marcus. You wanted a woman who understood the high-stakes financial world. Well, here I am, operating strictly as a corporate entity. You terminated our personal partnership, so now we are executing the business dissolution. Jasmine set her coffee cup down on the bare kitchen counter, her hands trembling visibly. Marcus, she whispered, her voice laced with panic and humiliation. Are you telling me you do not own any of this? Marcus whipped his head around to look at his mistress, his face red with a mixture of shame and fury. Shut up, Jasmine. I own the house. The house is the real asset. I will just buy new furniture. With what money? Connor suddenly spoke up, his voice dripping with ironic cruelty. He was desperate to deflect attention away from his own financial crimes by piling onto Marcus. Connor let out a harsh, mocking laugh. You are tapped out, Marcus. I have seen your bank accounts. You spent your entire bonus on that ridiculous diamond necklace for Jasmine, and you are leveraged to the hilt on this mortgage. You cannot even afford to furnish a one-bedroom apartment right now, let alone a 6,000 square foot estate. Beatrice let out a loud wail, burying her face in her hands. The pristine upper-class image she had carefully curated for her church friends was evaporating in front of her eyes. Her successful son was a hollow shell, And her daughter-in-law, the woman she had spent 5 years insulting, was the actual powerhouse in the room. I nodded to Derek, giving him the final authorization. Clear it all out, Derek. Leave nothing but the drywall and the dust. The crew descended upon the living room like a highly organized swarm of locusts. Within minutes, the custom velvet sofa was wrapped in thick plastic and rolled out the front door. The heavy imported rugs were rolled up and hoisted onto shoulders. The expensive artwork was taken down from the walls, leaving behind faded rectangular outlines on the pristine paint. The illusion of wealth was being systematically dismantled piece by piece, box by box. Marcus stood in the center of the rapidly emptying room, his shoulders slumped, his breathing erratic. He pulled his cell phone from his pocket, his fingers jabbing violently at the screen. "I am calling the police," he threatened, his voice lacking any real conviction. "You cannot just take everything. I will have them stop the trucks. I will have you arrested for grand larceny." I smiled, picking up my black suitcase and adjusting the handle. "Call them, Marcus. Please call them. I would absolutely love to show the authorities the fully executed contract, complete with your notarized signature. I am sure the police will be thrilled to mediate a documented corporate asset recovery. But you might want to wait a few minutes before you dial 911. Marcus paused, his thumb hovering over the screen. "Why?" "Because I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the front door. We still need to discuss how you are going to pay the rent you owe me." Marcus blinked, his face contorting, as his brain struggled to process the word rent. But before he could formulate a response or demand an explanation, the shrill whining of an industrial power drill shattered the remaining quiet of the house. Marcus whipped his head around. In the center of the grand living room, two of my largest crew members were already locking the wheels of an aluminum A-frame scaffold into place, directly beneath the massive baccarat crystal chandelier. "Stop what you are doing!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. He sprinted past me, completely abandoning our conversation, and threw himself toward the scaffolding. "That is a permanent architectural fixture. You cannot touch the lighting. I will sue you for property damage." He reached out and grabbed the forearm of one of my workers who was stepping onto the first rung of the ladder. The worker, a man named Hector, who had been with my company since day one, did not even flinch. He just looked down at Marcus's manicured hand gripping his work shirt. Derek was there in less than a second. He stepped between Marcus and Hector, his massive frame easily dwarfing my soon-to-be ex-husband. Derek did not raise his voice, but the low, dangerous rumble of his warning carried perfectly across the empty space. "Take your hand off my crew member, sir," Derek said, staring dead into Marcus's eyes. "If you make physical contact with my staff again, I will not call the police to mediate a civil dispute. I will call them to arrest you for assault. Step back." Marcus immediately dropped his hand, stumbling backward. He looked at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "Nia, tell them to stop. The chandelier is wired into the ceiling. It belongs to the house. You are destroying my property value." I walked into the living room, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply against the bare hardwood. The custom imported rug had already been rolled up and removed, transforming the acoustics of the room. Every sound was starting to echo, bouncing off the naked walls. "Check the addendum on page 4, Marcus," I said, pointing to the heavy folder he had dropped on the floor earlier. The baccarat chandelier utilizes a custom quick-release modular bracket specifically designed for high-end staging. It is not hardwired into your property. It plugs into a hidden commercial receptacle. We can detach it in exactly 4 minutes without leaving a single scratch on your ceiling. I turned to Jasmine, who was standing frozen by the kitchen island, watching the breathtaking display of wealth being dismantled right in front of her. "You were admiring the lighting earlier, Jasmine," I said, keeping my tone conversational and light. "It really is a stunning piece. But let me tell you the true story behind that chandelier." 3 years ago, Marcus invited the senior managing director of his firm over for an executive dinner. He wanted to secure a promotion by projecting an image of massive generational wealth. He went to a luxury lighting boutique and picked out that exact crystal fixture. But when it came time to pay his credit card was declined. Marcus let out a strangled sound of humiliation, but I did not stop speaking. He called me from the store parking lot in an absolute panic. I continued my gaze locked on Jasmine. He was sweating, terrified that his boss would arrive the next evening to a house with basic builder-grade lighting. So I made a wire transfer from my company operating account. I paid $45,000 in cash. I had my team rush deliver it and install it at 2 in the morning. When the managing director arrived the next night, Marcus stood under those crystals holding a glass of scotch and claimed he had imported it directly from France himself. He took the credit, but my company holds the receipt. Hector unclipped the heavy safety harness and slowly lowered the massive sparkling fixture into a customized foam-padded crate. The sudden absence of the chandelier left a gaping dark void in the ceiling. The room instantly lost its warm, glowing ambiance, feeling hollow and lifeless. "Take the smart television next," I ordered, pointing to the 85-inch screen mounted above the stone fireplace. "No," Marcus yelled, lunging forward again but catching himself before he got too close to Derek. "Nia, please. You are leaving me with nothing. How am I supposed to live in a completely empty house?" "You will live exactly the way you did before I subsidized your entire existence," I replied, my voice ice cold. The crew moved with ruthless efficiency. While 2 men detached the television and wrapped it in thick blankets, another team had moved into the kitchen. I watched as they began unscrewing the custom smart shelving units that lined the pantry. These were modular inserts designed to look like permanent cabinetry, but they were entirely removable. "Hey, stop doing that!" Jasmine suddenly shrieked, her voice pitching into a panicked whine. She rushed toward the kitchen counter as a worker reached for the gleaming silver espresso machine. "You cannot take that! I just used it. I need my coffee maker." The worker paused, looking at me for direction. I gave him a curt nod. "Pack it." Jasmine slammed her hands down on the marble island, her perfectly contoured face twisting in outrage. "This is insane. Marcus, do something." "She is taking the kitchen appliances." Marcus just stood there, hyperventilating, unable to stop the tidal wave of corporate repossession. I walked up the 2 steps into the kitchen area, standing directly across the island from Jasmine. "The espresso machine belongs to Aura Lux Jasmine," I stated clearly. "So do the matching matte black toaster, the smart blender, and the automated wine cooler. Every appliance that sits on a counter in this house is commercial inventory. If you want a latte tomorrow morning, I suggest you walk down to the local coffee shop. Or better yet, ask Marcus to buy you one. Let us see if his credit card clears this time." The sound of heavy dollies rolling across the floor created a chaotic symphony of destruction. Beatrice was openly weeping now, watching as 2 workers removed the antique dining table where she had hosted her prestigious church friends just last month. Tara had retreated to a far corner, pulling Connor along with her, trying to stay out of the path of the relentless moving crew. "You are a monster." Marcus spat, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. "You are doing this just to humiliate me in front of my family." "I am doing this because it is standard operating procedure for a terminated contract," I replied. "You demanded a clean break. I am simply facilitating it. You wanted to play the role of the self-made king, but you forgot that I built your throne. I bought your crown. I painted your scenery. And now the play is over. The curtain has fallen." A loud metallic clatter echoed from the master bedroom upstairs, followed by the heavy thumping of boots descending the staircase. 2 workers carried down the custom California king mattress wrapped tightly in heavy-duty plastic. Right behind them, another worker carried the dismantled pieces of the tufted velvet headboard. Marcus watched his own bed being carried out the front door. The reality of his situation was finally breaking through his thick layer of arrogance. He was going to sleep on a bare hardwood floor tonight. His magnificent $1 million mansion was nothing more than an empty wooden box. "Please," Marcus whispered, the fight completely draining out of his voice. His shoulders sagged, and he looked at me with pathetic, pleading eyes. "Nia, please leave the bed. Just leave the bed and the couch. I will pay you for them. I will set up a payment plan. Just do not leave me with a totally empty house. Jasmine cannot live in an empty house." I tilted my head, studying the broken man standing in front of me. 10 minutes ago, he was ordering me out of his property, threatening me, and parading his mistress around my living room. Now he was begging me for a mattress. "You do not have the liquid capital to purchase that bed, Marcus," I said, my tone analytical and detached. "And unfortunately, my company does not offer financing to clients with a history of contract termination. You told Jasmine you wanted a fresh start. You told her she could pick out new things to reflect your energy. I am just giving you a blank canvas." I turned to Derek, who was checking off items on his digital clipboard. "What is the status, Derek?" "Main floor is cleared, boss," Derek reported. "Upper bedrooms are stripped. We are taking the patio furniture from the deck right now. The trucks will be fully loaded in 10 minutes. "Excellent," I said. I looked around the living room. Without the heavy rugs, the velvet curtains, and the plush furniture, the space felt massive, cold, and completely devoid of character. The walls showed faint outlines where large pieces of art had hung for years. The echoes of our footsteps bounced harshly off the bare drywall. It did not look like a luxury estate anymore. It looked like an abandoned warehouse. Marcus dropped to his knees right there in the middle of the empty living room. The sharp sound of his kneecaps hitting the bare hardwood echoed loudly. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. The illusion was gone. The fake wealth, the fake status, the fake superiority had all been loaded into the back of my commercial freight trucks. Jasmine stared at him, her expression shifting from panic to absolute disgust. She was looking at a man who owned nothing, a man crying on a dirty wooden floor. But the physical dismantling of his ego was only the beginning. He was crying over losing his furniture, but he had not even begun to comprehend the financial bomb I was about to drop on him. I had promised him an eviction notice, and I always deliver on my promises. I watched Marcus sobbing on the bare floorboards, but my attention shifted to Jasmine. She had retreated to the matching emerald green velvet loveseat tucked in the alcove by the bay windows. It was the very last piece of furniture remaining on the main floor, and she was clinging to it like a life raft in the middle of a sinking ship. She sat with her arms tightly crossed over her chest, her legs stubbornly planted. She was desperately trying to maintain some semblance of the arrogant authority she had strutted in with just an hour ago. Hector approached the alcove carrying a massive roll of industrial plastic wrap. "Excuse me, Miss," Hector said, his voice completely flat and professional. "We need to clear this section. I need you to stand up." Jasmine glared at him, her eyes flashing with a desperate, frantic energy. "I am not moving." She snapped, her voice echoing harshly against the bare walls. "You cannot just come in here and take the chair right out from under me. Marcus, tell them to stop. Tell them they cannot touch this." Marcus did not even look up. He remained on his knees in the center of the room, his head buried in his hands, completely paralyzed by the reality of his financial ruin. Hector did not argue. He did not ask a second time. He simply looked across the room and caught my eye. I gave him a single sharp nod. Hector signaled to another worker. The two burly men stepped up to either side of the velvet loveseat. Without a single word of warning, they gripped the heavy brass base of the furniture and lifted it straight up off the ground, tilting it sharply forward to slide the moving blankets underneath. Jasmine let out a piercing shriek as gravity took over. She frantically clawed at the velvet upholstery, but there was nothing to grab onto. She slid right off the slick fabric and tumbled unceremoniously onto the hard wooden floor. She landed with a heavy, undignified thud. Her designer knockoff handbag hit the floor right beside her, spilling its contents everywhere. Cheap lip gloss, a compact mirror, and a handful of maxed-out credit cards scattered across the dusty floorboards. "Hey!" Jasmine screamed, scrambling to push her hair out of her face. Her fast fashion dress was twisted around her thighs, and her pristine image was completely shattered. "You cannot do that to me. I am the lady of this house." The two workers completely ignored her shrieking. They wrapped the loveseat in thick plastic, hoisted it onto a dolly, and rolled it right past her out the front door. Jasmine sat alone on the bare, dusty floor, surrounded by the spilled contents of her purse. The reality of the situation finally seemed to penetrate her thick layer of delusion. She looked at the massive, empty living room. She looked at the exposed electrical wires hanging from the ceiling where the chandelier used to be. She looked at the bare kitchen counters stripped of every luxury appliance she had planned to use. And then she looked at Marcus. The wealthy, sophisticated financial executive she had so proudly stolen away from me was kneeling on the floor, weeping like a child over a repossessed mattress. "You lied to me," Jasmine yelled, scrambling to her feet. Her voice was trembling with a potent mix of absolute rage and deep, crushing humiliation. "You told me you were rich, Marcus. You told me you owned all of this. You told me you were taking care of her and that I was stepping into a luxury lifestyle." Marcus finally lifted his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and his perfectly tailored suit was covered in floor dust. "Jasmine, please," he begged, his voice hoarse. "I can fix this. I just need a little time to move some assets around. We will buy new furniture. Better furniture." "Buy new furniture?" Jasmine repeated, her voice cracking with hysterical disbelief. "With what money, Marcus?" "That guy Connor just said your bank accounts are empty. He said you are leveraged to the hilt. You do not even own a coffee maker." "What exactly did I sign up for?" "A mortgage you cannot afford and an empty room." I took a few slow, deliberate steps toward her. My heels clicked sharply against the wood, a rhythmic reminder of exactly who held the power in this room. "That is the problem with trying to steal a kingdom. Jasmine," I said, my voice smooth and chillingly calm. "You get so blinded by the sparkling crown that you forget to ask who actually forged the gold. You looked at Marcus, and you saw a finished product. You saw the tailored suits, the expensive dinners, the $1 million estate. You thought you were winning a prize. But you did not win a prize, Jasmine. You won a massive liability." Jasmine stared at me, her chest heaving. The arrogant smirk she had worn when she paraded into my kitchen earlier this morning was completely gone, replaced by the terrifying realization that she had played herself into a corner. She had bragged to all her friends about landing a senior wealth manager. She had already posted photos of my custom living room on her social media, claiming it as her new home. The public humiliation she was going to face when she had to explain why she was living in an empty house with a broke man was going to be astronomical. "You set him up," Jasmine spat, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You purposely made him look rich just so you could pull the rug out from under him. You are a psychopath." I smiled, folding my arms across my silk blazer. "I did not set him up, Jasmine. I invested in him. I built the stage he needed to succeed in his career because I believed in our partnership. But the moment he decided to break that partnership, he surrendered the benefits of my capital. I am not punishing him. I am simply withdrawing my funding. If Marcus is truly the brilliant financial genius you both believe he is, he should have no problem rebuilding his empire from scratch." Jasmine looked back at Marcus. The disgust in her eyes was palpable. She saw a man who had used my money to attract her. A man who had lied about his net worth to stroke his own ego. She had traded her youth and her dignity to be the mistress of a man who was entirely subsidized by his wife. "I cannot do this," Jasmine muttered, shaking her head frantically. She knelt down and began shoving her scattered belongings back into her knockoff purse. Her hands were trembling so badly she dropped her lipstick twice before finally securing it. "I am not staying in an empty house with a broke liar." "Jasmine, wait!" Marcus pleaded, scrambling to his feet. He reached out to grab her arm, but she violently jerked away from him. "Do not touch me!" she shrieked, backing away toward the front door. "You are pathetic, Marcus. You let her buy everything for you, and you acted like you were the man. You are nothing but a fraud. I am not sleeping on a hard floor for you. We are done." She did not look back. She practically sprinted out the front door, her heels clicking frantically down the driveway. I watched through the bare front window as she hailed a rideshare on her phone, standing as far away from the house as possible. The woman who had proudly declared herself the new lady of the house was fleeing the property before the morning was even over. Marcus stood in the center of the echoing room, completely abandoned. He had lost his wife, he had lost his luxury lifestyle, and now he had lost the young, naive mistress he had blown up his entire life to impress. He was entirely, totally alone. But the physical and social dismantling of Marcus was only the prelude. He was grieving the loss of his velvet sofas and his 26-year-old girlfriend, but he still clung to the delusion that he owned the four walls surrounding him. He still believed he had the deed. He still believed he had a roof over his head. It was time to extinguish that final remaining spark of hope. It was time to show him who actually owned the ground he was crying on. The heavy front door clicked shut, completely sealing Marcus inside the massive, echoing void of the house he claimed to own. Without the heavy drapery and the thick imported rugs to absorb the sound, every single breath he took bounced harshly off the bare drywall. The silence left in Jasmine's wake was suffocating. Marcus remained on his knees for a long, agonizing moment, staring at the dusty floorboards where his velvet sofa had rested just 30 minutes prior. Then a violent tremor shook his shoulders. He scrambled to his feet, his expensive tailored suit now wrinkled and smeared with gray dust. His eyes were wide and manic, darting around the completely barren living room as if hoping the furniture would magically reappear. When his gaze finally locked onto me, his face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "You think this is a game?" Marcus shouted, his voice cracking as it echoed up into the vaulted ceiling. "You think you can just march in here and destroy my life, and I'm just going to stand by and watch you do it?" He plunged his shaking hand into his trousers and pulled out his cell phone. His thumb jabbed aggressively at the screen. I did not move a single muscle. I stood perfectly still near the marble kitchen island, watching the exact moment a man who had built his entire identity on a fragile illusion decided to invoke the power of the state to protect his shattered ego. "I am calling the police," Marcus threatened, waving the phone in my direction. "I am ending this right now, Nia. You are going to be walked out of my neighborhood in handcuffs." Connor, who had been standing frozen near the kitchen, suddenly sprang to life. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a blue dress shirt. He lunged forward and grabbed Marcus by the forearm. Marcus put the phone down. Connor hissed, his voice trembling with absolute terror. "Do not call the cops. We do not need law enforcement here. We can handle this internally." Marcus violently shoved his brother-in-law backward. "Handle this internally," he roared. "Look around you, Connor. She stripped my house to the studs. She humiliated me in front of my girlfriend. This is grand larceny. She brought a gang of thugs into a gated community and robbed me blind." Connor stumbled back, his eyes darting frantically toward the front window. He was sweating profusely now, dark patches forming under the arms of his expensive shirt. Connor did not care about Marcus losing his furniture. Connor cared about the fact that I had just exposed his fraudulent offshore crypto investments. He knew that if the police arrived and started taking statements about financial disputes, his illegal mishandling of Beatrice's retirement fund would inevitably come to light. He was staring down the barrel of a federal wire fraud investigation, and Marcus was about to hand-deliver the police to the front door. "Marcus, do not be an idiot," Connor begged, holding his hands up in surrender. "It is a civil dispute. The police will just make things worse. Think about the optics. Think about the firm. If the police show up at your house, it goes on the public record." "I do not care about the record," Marcus screamed, tapping the screen of his phone and raising it to his ear. "I want her arrested. I want my property back." I leaned casually against the bare kitchen counter, crossing my arms over my silk blazer. I let a slow, highly amused smile spread across my face. "Let him call them Connor," I said, my voice smooth and projecting perfectly across the empty room. "Marcus has spent his entire adult life believing that the authorities exist solely to protect his comfort and his property. He is a senior wealth manager living in an exclusive suburb. He firmly believes a 911 dispatcher is basically his personal concierge service. Let him test that theory." Marcus shot me a venomous glare before turning his attention to the phone. "Yes, I need police immediately," he barked into the receiver, projecting his most authoritative corporate voice. "My name is Marcus Vance. I am at my private residence. I need multiple units dispatched right away. My estranged wife has hired a crew of criminals to break into my home and steal my property. It is a robbery in progress. Yes, they are still on the premises." Beatrice let out a loud, dramatic sob from the staircase. "Oh my God, my heart. I cannot take this stress. My own son has to call the police on his wife. What will the neighbors think? The entire street is going to see the squad cars." Tara rushed to her mother's side, completely ignoring her husband's panic. "This is all your fault, Nia." Tara snapped, her voice echoing harshly. You pushed him to this. You could have just packed your bags and left quietly, but you had to be vindictive. Now you are going to get a criminal record. I ignored her completely, keeping my focus entirely on Marcus. He was pacing the length of the bare living room, nodding aggressively as he spoke to the dispatcher. Yes, the house is in my name, he confirmed loudly, making sure I heard him. I am the sole owner of the property. She has zero equity and zero legal right to remove any assets from this estate. Send them fast. She has freight trucks blocking the street. Marcus lowered the phone and ended the call. He stood tall, adjusting his dusty suit jacket, attempting to reclaim the arrogant posture he had worn when he handed me the divorce papers. They are 5 minutes away, he announced, a cruel, triumphant sneer twisting his features. They are sending 3 patrol cars. I hope you enjoyed your little power trip, Nia, because it is over. You are going to jail for grand theft, and I am going to make sure your little staging company is liquidated by the state to pay for my emotional distress. I checked the gold watch on my left wrist. It was exactly 8:15 in the morning. I knew the response time for the local precinct in this affluent neighborhood. Marcus was right. The police would arrive in less than 5 minutes. They prided themselves on rapid response to property crimes in this zip code. That gives us roughly 4 minutes and 30 seconds, I noted, calmly looking up from my watch. 4.5 minutes for you to bask in the illusion that you are still in control. You think you are so smart? Marcus sneered, taking a step toward me. His confidence had artificially inflated the moment he hung up the phone. You think having a corporate contract makes you untouchable? You brought unidentified men into a gated community and stripped $1 million home. The police do not care about your paperwork. They care about preserving the peace and protecting the homeowner. I am the homeowner. I have the deed. When they walk through that door, they are going to see a hostile trespasser trying to steal from a successful executive. I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It bubbled up from my chest, filling the vast, empty space with a sound of pure, unbothered amusement. Marcus, your fundamental misunderstanding of the law is almost as tragic as your misunderstanding of basic finance, I said, shaking my head slowly. You called the police to report a robbery in progress. Do you know what happens when law enforcement arrives at a supposed crime scene and finds a fully documented, commercially licensed logistics crew executing a signed, legally binding asset retrieval? They get very annoyed. Because you just wasted municipal resources on a domestic civil dispute. I took a slow step forward, my heels clicking sharply against the wood. You are banking on the police taking one look at your tailored suit and assuming you are the victim. But what they are actually going to see is a hysterical man standing in an empty room who does not even know the legal definition of theft. The heavy front door swung open, and Derek stepped back into the foyer. He held his thick aluminum clipboard in one hand. The last truck is loaded and sealed. Boss Derek reported, his deep voice cutting through the tension in the room. The crew is secured in the cabs. Do you want us to roll out before the local authorities show up? Marcus pointed a shaking finger at Derek. Nobody is leaving. The police are on their way. If you try to move those trucks, I will tell them you are fleeing a crime scene. Derek just looked at Marcus with the exhausted patience of a man staring at a screaming toddler. He turned his attention back to me, completely dismissing Marcus's threat. No, Derek, I said, maintaining my calm, relaxed posture. Tell the crew to cut the engines and stand by. We are not going anywhere. We are going to wait right here for the grand finale. Make sure you have the original staging agreement and the corporate manifests ready for inspection. Copy that, boss. Derek nodded, tapping his pen against the clipboard before turning around and stepping back out onto the porch. Connor was pacing near the kitchen island, now visibly shaking. He pulled out his own cell phone, staring blankly at the screen, as if waiting for a miracle to save him from the impending police arrival. Tara watched her husband, her confusion growing rapidly into suspicion. She finally realized that Connor was not angry at me for taking the furniture. Connor was terrified of the flashing lights heading toward the house. The silence inside the empty mansion became incredibly heavy. The absence of the furniture amplified every single sound. The erratic breathing of Marcus, the quiet weeping of Beatrice on the stairs, the frantic tapping of Connor's designer shoes against the hardwood floor. I simply stood my ground, an anchor of absolute stillness in a room full of drowning people. I counted the seconds in my head, tracking the inevitable approach of reality. Then it happened. The sound started as a faint, high-pitched wail in the distance, echoing through the quiet, manicured streets of the wealthy subdivision. Within seconds, the wail grew into a piercing, aggressive roar. Brilliant flashes of red and blue light began bouncing off the interior walls of the empty living room, casting long, erratic shadows across the bare floorboards. The heavy tires of multiple police cruisers screeched to a halt right at the edge of the driveway, completely boxing in my commercial freight trucks. "The cavalry has arrived," Marcus said, my voice soft, but slicing through the blaring sirens like a perfectly honed blade. "Let us go see if that badge can save your ego." 3 uniformed officers stormed through the open front door, their hands resting defensively on their utility belts. They swept into the foyer with tactical precision, their eyes scanning the bare walls and the remaining crew members standing near the entrance. The lead officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a stern expression, immediately focused on Derek, who was still holding his aluminum clipboard. "Step away from the vehicles and keep your hands where I can see them," the lead officer barked, his voice commanding absolute authority. Derek did not argue or resist. He calmly raised his hands and took 2 steps back from the doorway, signaling for his crew to do the same. They were professionals who had dealt with angry landlords and confused authorities before. Marcus instantly transformed. The weeping, broken man from 5 minutes ago vanished completely, replaced by the polished, entitled executive who believed the justice system was his personal concierge service. He rushed toward the officers, pointing a shaking finger directly at me and then at Derek. "Officers, thank God you are here," Marcus said, projecting his voice to sound perfectly distressed but entirely reasonable. "I am the owner of this property. This woman is my estranged wife. I served her with divorce papers yesterday, and in retaliation she hired these men to break into my home and steal my property. They have already loaded my entire living room and master bedroom into those freight trucks outside. You need to arrest her and force them to unload my belongings." Jasmine, sensing an opportunity to play the victim, hurried over to stand behind Marcus. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering for dramatic effect. "It was terrifying, officer," she chimed in, her voice trembling artificially. "They just marched in here and started ripping the furniture right out from under us. We told them to stop, but they refused." The lead officer turned his attention to me. His gaze was hard, assessing the situation. He saw a wealthy black man in a designer suit claiming he was being robbed by a woman who had brought a fleet of commercial trucks into a gated community. The optics were exactly what Marcus had banked on. "Ma'am," the officer said, stepping toward me, "I need you to instruct your men to shut down those trucks immediately. You cannot remove property from a shared marital residence during a pending divorce without a court order. If you do not stop this operation right now, I will have to place you under arrest for grand larceny." Marcus let out a sharp, victorious breath. He looked at me, his chest puffed out with arrogant triumph. "I told you, Nia," he whispered, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. "You are not untouchable." I did not break eye contact with the officer. I kept my hands casually clasped in front of me, projecting total tranquility. "I completely understand your concern, officer," I replied, my voice steady and respectful. "However, you have been misinformed about the nature of this operation. This is not a marital dispute over shared assets. This is a corporate asset retrieval." Before the officer could ask for clarification, the sharp sound of leather shoes clicking against the concrete walkway echoed from outside. A sleek black town car had silently pulled up behind the police cruisers. A man stepped through the front door, stepping past the officers with the kind of effortless authority that commanded immediate respect. He was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal pinstripe suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. This was Julian Vance. Not a relative of Marcus, despite the coincidence of the last name, but a senior partner at one of the most ruthless corporate litigation firms in Atlanta. He was my lead corporate counsel, and I had texted him the moment Marcus handed me the divorce papers. "Good morning, officers," Julian said, his voice deep and entirely unbothered by the flashing police lights outside. "I apologize for the confusion. My name is Julian Vance. I am the lead legal counsel for Aura Lux Staging and Procurement LLC. My client, the chief executive officer of the company, is currently executing a standard retrieval of commercial inventory. The lead officer frowned, looking between me and Julian. Sir, the homeowner here claims this furniture belongs to him. He states this is his private residence. He is half right, Julian replied smoothly, unsnapping the clasps of his leather briefcase. He owns the drywall and the plumbing, but he does not own a single thread of the fabric inside those trucks. Julian pulled out a thick stack of documents stamped with official corporate seals and handed them directly to the lead officer. What you are holding is a commercial staging lease agreement, Julian explained, pointing to the highlighted sections. You will see the notarized signature of Mr. Marcus Vance, right there on the second page, acknowledging that all furnishings are the exclusive property of Aura Lux LLC. You will also see the termination clause, which was activated yesterday when Mr. Vance initiated divorce proceedings against the corporate guarantor. Marcus panicked. His triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by sheer terror as he watched the police officer actually read the documents. That is just a technicality, Marcus shouted, taking a step toward the officer. It was a tax write-off. I pay the mortgage. The house is mine. You cannot let them take my things based on a loophole. It is not a loophole, Mr. Vance, Julian countered without even looking at him. It is a binding corporate contract. The lead officer flipped to the third page of the packet. He studied the detailed inventory manifest, which listed every single item in the house alongside a specific serial number. If you need physical verification. Julian continued, gesturing toward the kitchen. You can check the underside of that smart blender remaining on the counter. You will find a silver barcode tag that matches the serial number listed on page 4 of that manifest. Every single piece of furniture, lighting, and decor we have removed today bears that exact same corporate asset tag. The second officer walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up the heavy smart blender and flipped it over. He scanned the bottom and nodded to his partner. He is right. There is a commercial asset tag here. The serial number matches the paperwork. The lead officer sighed heavily, closing the folder and handing it back to Julian. His aggressive posture immediately relaxed, shifting into deep annoyance. He turned to Marcus, his expression stern and entirely unsympathetic. Sir, the officer said, his voice dropping an octave. This is a fully documented commercial lease agreement. These items belong to this corporation, not to you. But I live here, Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. You cannot just let them strip my house bare. This is a domestic issue. She is my wife. She is the CEO of the company that owns the furniture, the officer corrected him sharply. And you signed a contract explicitly stating you do not own these items. This is a civil dispute over a corporate lease. The police department does not mediate civil contract disputes. If you believe there is a breach of contract, you need to take it up in civil court. But right now, these people have every legal right to retrieve their commercial property. Marcus stood there completely paralyzed. His ultimate weapon, the authorities he was so certain would protect his fragile ego, had just publicly validated his absolute ruin. You called 911 and reported a robbery in progress. The lead officer continued, his tone reprimanding. You diverted 3 patrol cars from actual emergencies for a contract dispute you knew about. Do not ever misuse the emergency dispatch system like this again, sir. If you do, I will personally cite you for filing a false police report. Jasmine let out a quiet, horrified gasp, stepping further away from Marcus as if his humiliation were a contagious disease. Beatrice kept her face buried in her hands, weeping silently on the stairs. Connor remained pressed against the kitchen wall, sweating through his shirt, entirely grateful that the police were not looking into any financial records beyond the furniture contract. We apologize for the inconvenience, officers, I said, stepping forward and offering a polite nod. We are completely finished here. The trucks are ready to depart. The lead officer tipped his hat to me. Have a good day, Mom. Make sure your drivers pull out carefully. The 3 officers turned on their heels and marched right out the front door, walking past a devastated Marcus without giving him a second glance. The heavy oak door remained open behind them, letting the crisp morning breeze sweep through the completely empty living room. Marcus fell back against the bare wall, sliding down until he hit the floorboards. He pulled his knees up to his chest, staring blankly at the space where his luxury life used to be. The flashing red and blue lights disappeared down the street, taking his last shred of dignity with them. Julian snapped his briefcase shut. If he attempts to contact you regarding the inventory, I will file a restraining order on behalf of the corporation, Julian stated, adjusting his suit jacket. I will see you at the office later, Nia. Thank you, Julian, I replied. I picked up my single black suitcase. The sound of the wheels rolling across the bare wood echoed loudly in the hollow house. I stopped right in front of Marcus, looking down at the man who had ordered me out of his life just 24 hours ago. I told you I was only taking my personal belongings, Marcus. I said, my voice soft, but absolutely merciless. I hope you and Jasmine enjoy your fresh start. I walked out the front door, stepping into the bright morning sunlight. Behind me, the heavy engines of my 5 commercial freight trucks roared to life, ready to carry my empire away and leave him with absolutely nothing. I had barely reached the door of my sleek black Range Rover when the desperate sound of Marcus's voice echoed across the manicured lawn. "You think you won," he screamed, his voice cracking as he stumbled out onto the front porch. I paused with my hand on the door handle. I did not turn around immediately. I let him stew in his own panic for a few agonizing seconds. Then I slowly pivoted on my heels to face him. Marcus was clutching the doorframe, his chest heaving. Beatrice and Connor stood behind him in the shadows of the empty foyer like frightened ghosts. Tara was peeking over her husband's shoulder, her eyes wide with shock. "You took some couches," Nia, Marcus yelled, pointing a shaking finger at my fleet of trucks disappearing down the street. "You took some rugs and some fancy blenders. Do you honestly think that breaks me? I am Marcus Vance. I am a senior wealth manager at one of the top firms in the state. I make more in a single quarter than your little staging hustle makes in an entire year." I closed my car door and took a slow, deliberate step back up the driveway. "You are delusional." Marcus continued, his voice growing louder as he tried to convince himself of his own lies. "You think you left me with nothing. Look behind me, Nia. Look at this house. 6,000 square feet of prime real estate in the most exclusive zip code in Atlanta. I own this. My name is on the county records. My name is on the mortgage. I am the sole proprietor of a $1.5 million estate." He wiped the sweat from his forehead, his arrogance artificially inflating like a punctured tire desperately trying to hold air. "I can furnish this entire place by tomorrow afternoon. I have platinum cards. I have lines of credit you cannot even fathom. I will hire a real interior designer, someone who actually understands luxury and status. Not some bitter broke decorator who has to steal back her own inventory because she has no actual liquid assets to her name." Beatrice peeked out from behind her son's shoulder, her face lighting up with a sudden desperate glimmer of hope. "That is right, Marcus," she chimed in, her voice trembling but eager. "You still have your beautiful home. You still have your prestigious career. You are a high-value man. She is just a vindictive woman throwing a tantrum because you upgraded to a younger, more refined partner. Let her go back to the working-class slums she came from." Connor stepped out onto the porch, adjusting his collar. He was still sweating profusely from our earlier conversation, but he desperately needed to align himself with whoever held the power in the room. He needed to reassert his dominance as the white financial expert in a black household. "He has the equity," Nia, Connor said, attempting to sound deeply authoritative. "You put on a good show with the moving trucks, but from a purely financial standpoint, Marcus holds the appreciating asset. You just spent thousands of dollars on labor and transport to repossess depreciating furniture. It is a terrible return on investment. You let your emotions cloud your business judgment." I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at the three of them. They were clinging to this house like shipwreck survivors clinging to a piece of driftwood, completely unaware that the wood was rotting from the inside out. I looked at Marcus, who was puffing out his chest, trying to embody the toxic patriarchal image he worshipped. He genuinely believed that his gender and his job title made him invincible. He expected me to be the silent black woman laboring in the dark so he could shine in the light. I refused to play the mule any longer. A depreciating asset, I repeated, tilting my head as I looked directly at Connor. That is a very interesting assessment, Connor. Tell me, as a supposed wealth management expert, how much equity do you think Marcus actually has in this property right now? I put down 20% 5 years ago, Marcus snapped, taking an aggressive step forward. And I have paid the mortgage on the first of every single month without fail. I transfer the funds directly from my personal executive checking account. I am building generational wealth while you are packing up cheap throw pillows. I am the man of this house. I let out a soft, chilling laugh. It was not a laugh of amusement. It was the sound of a steel trap snapping shut. You transfer the funds directly from your personal executive checking account. I echoed, my voice dripping with lethal sarcasm. That is a very specific way to phrase it, Marcus. You log into your banking portal, you type in the routing number, and you hit send. You feel like an absolute king every time you make that payment, do you not? You feel like the ultimate provider. Because I am the provider, he roared, his face twisting in unhinged fury. I bought it, I pay for it, I own it. You were just a guest living under my roof. Do you even know who you are paying, Marcus? I asked, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Marcus frowned, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. What kind of stupid question is that? I pay the bank. First National Trust. The same bank that holds my executive accounts. I secured the mortgage through them 5 years ago. You did secure a mortgage through them 5 years ago, I agreed, taking one step up the concrete stairs. But you seem to have a very selective memory about what happened 3 years ago. Do you remember the massive crypto crash, Marcus? Do you remember when you decided to take out a reckless illegal loan against your own margin account to cover your devastating sports gambling debts? Marcus froze. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a hollowed-out shell. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Beatrice looked at her son in absolute horror. Gambling debts. She gasped, clutching her pearls so hard the string looked ready to snap. Marcus, what is she talking about? He is not going to tell you, Beatrice. I said, my eyes locked entirely on Marcus. Because telling you would shatter the flawless image he has built for this family. 3 years ago, Marcus defaulted on this glorious mortgage. First National Trust initiated formal foreclosure proceedings. This pristine $1 million estate was exactly 14 days away from being auctioned off on the county courthouse steps. Shut up, Marcus hissed, his voice shaking violently. Shut your mouth, Nia. I will not shut up, I commanded, my voice echoing sharply across the manicured lawn. You stood in the middle of that kitchen crying like a child. You begged me to save you. You said a public foreclosure would destroy your career at the firm. You said you would lose your financial licenses if the senior partners found out you were completely insolvent and drowning in gambling debts. Tara gasped, stepping back from her brother as if he were a stranger. Marcus, is this true? She demanded. Did you almost lose the house? Marcus could not answer. He was trembling visibly, his hands clenched into tight, useless fists. He was trapped in the blinding spotlight of his own failures. He did not just almost lose it, Tara. I corrected her smoothly, taking another step up the stairs. He actually lost it. The bank demanded immediate payment in full to halt the foreclosure. They refused to refinance him because his credit score was absolutely decimated by his hidden liabilities. No legitimate lender would touch him. I walked up the final step, standing face to face with Marcus on the porch. I was inches away from him, projecting total, absolute dominance. He tried to look away, but I stepped into his line of sight, forcing him to look at the woman he had just tried to discard. You called me a broke decorator, I whispered, staring directly into his terrified eyes. You said I was just along for the ride. You told Jasmine that you carried the heavy financial weight of this entire family. You demanded I pack my cheap trinkets and leave. I reached into my tailored silk blazer and pulled out a single folded document. It was not a staging contract. It was something much more powerful. I held it up between us, letting the crisp white paper catch the bright morning sunlight. I did not just decorate this house, Marcus, I said, my voice ringing with undeniable absolute authority. I saved it. But I am a brilliant businesswoman, and successful businesswomen do not throw their hard-earned capital into a black hole without securing a solid return on investment. Marcus stared at the document in my hand, his breathing ragged and shallow. "What is that?" He choked out, a primal fear taking over his entire body. "You said you pay the bank every month." I continued, my smile widening into something merciless and sharp. "You log in and you send your money to an account routing number that you memorized 3 years ago when the mortgage was magically restructured. But you never bothered to check who actually owns that routing number, did you?" Connor let out a sharp, strangled gasp from the doorway. As a stockbroker, he suddenly realized exactly what I was implying. The financial implications hit him like a freight train. "Oh my God," Connor whispered, his eyes wide with shock. "The restructuring, the blind routing number. What is it?" "Connor," Beatrice cried out, grabbing his arm frantically. "What does that mean?" I turned to look at my former mother-in-law holding the document high so she could see the official state seals stamped at the bottom. "It means, Beatrice, that your highly successful son does not own this property," I announced, my voice perfectly clear and unapologetic. 3 years ago, First National Trust sold the deed to a private holding firm to clear his defaulted debt. The bank does not own this house anymore. Marcus shook his head violently, stepping backward until he hit the doorframe. "No, no, that is impossible. I signed the checks. The deed is in my name." "The deed was in your name," I corrected him sharply. "You signed a quitclaim deed to avoid public bankruptcy and keep your job. You transferred full legal ownership of this estate to an anonymous corporate entity called Vanguard Holdings, LLC. And in exchange, they agreed to let you stay in the property as long as you made monthly payments to their designated trust account." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, backing him directly into the wall of his empty house. "You are not a homeowner, Marcus," I said, delivering the final crushing blow to his fragile ego. "You are a tenant who has been paying rent to Vanguard Holdings, LLC for 3 years. And you are a tenant who is currently 2 months behind on his payments because you spent your money on a diamond necklace for your mistress." Jasmine's diamond necklace. The words hung in the crisp morning air like a death sentence. Marcus stared at me, his jaw slack, his eyes darting frantically as he tried to process the magnitude of his own stupidity. "Vanguard Holdings is a corporate entity," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. "It is a subsidiary of the bank. The lawyer who handled the restructuring told me it was an internal transfer." I let out a sharp laugh. "A lawyer you never met in person, Marcus. A lawyer who communicated with you entirely through encrypted emails and courier services because you were too terrified of stepping foot inside a legitimate law firm. You were paralyzed by the fear that your senior partners would find out you blew hundreds of thousands of dollars on illegal sports betting. You were so desperate for a lifeline that you signed a massive stack of legal documents without ever asking who actually funded the buyout." I took a step closer, forcing him to look at the official state seal on the paper I was holding. "Vanguard Holdings, LLC is a blind trust, Marcus. And I am the sole beneficiary and the sole managing director. I own the trust. The trust owns the house, which means I own this house." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens right after a bomb detonates before the shockwave actually hits. Beatrice let out a high-pitched gasp, stumbling backward until she hit the porch railing. "My son, the homeowner," she wailed, pressing her hands against her cheeks. "You lied to me, Marcus. You told me you paid off your debts. You told me you were building an empire." "He did build an empire, Beatrice," I said, never taking my eyes off my soon-to-be ex-husband. "He just built it on a foundation of lies and my capital. 3 years ago, when the bank was ready to publicly auction this property and end his career, I took the profits from my commercial staging company and I bought his debt. I paid off First National Trust in full. I had my corporate attorneys set up Vanguard Holdings to keep my name off the public records so his fragile masculine ego would remain intact." I turned to look at Connor, who was leaning heavily against the doorframe, looking like he might pass out. "You are a stockbroker, Connor," I said. "Explain it to him. Explain to your brother-in-law exactly what he signed." Connor swallowed hard, his eyes glued to the documents in my hand. "He signed a quitclaim deed, Connor said, his voice barely a whisper. He relinquished all equity and ownership rights to the trust. The monthly payments were not mortgage installments, they were lease payments. He is just a tenant. Marcus lunged forward, wildly grabbing at the paperwork. "You tricked me!" he screamed, his face contorted in absolute rage. "You set me up! That is fraud, Nia. That is illegal. I will take you to court. I will have the judge tear this trust apart." I sidestepped his clumsy grab, smoothly pulling the document out of his reach. "Take me to court, Marcus!" I challenged, my voice rising with absolute authority. "Please do. Let us stand in front of a judge and enter your illegal sports gambling records into public evidence. Let us show the court exactly why you were facing foreclosure. Let us subpoena your senior partners and ask them how they feel about a wealth manager who gambles away his client's trust and defaults on his own mortgage. I am sure the firm will be absolutely thrilled to read the transcripts." Marcus froze. The threat of public exposure was the only thing he feared more than losing his money. His entire identity was wrapped up in being a high-powered executive. If his firm found out about his gambling history and his financial ruin, he would be fired before lunch. He would lose his licenses. He would be permanently blacklisted from the financial sector. "You see, Marcus?" I continued, pacing slowly across the porch. "I did not trick you. I saved you. I gave you a roof over your head and a way to save face. All you had to do was pay your monthly rent and treat me with basic respect. But you could not even do that. You let your ego grow so large you actually forgot who paid for the ground you walk on. You decided to bring a 26-year-old intern into my house on our anniversary. You handed me divorce papers and demanded I leave." I stopped pacing and stood directly in front of him. "You told Jasmine you carried the heavy financial weight of this family," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "But the truth is you could not even carry yourself. You are a financial parasite, Marcus. And the host is officially cutting you off." I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer and pulled out a second folded document. This one was printed on bright yellow paper. The color was universally recognized by anyone who had ever rented property in the state of Georgia. Marcus stared at the yellow paper, his breathing ragged and shallow. "No," he choked out, backing away from me. "No, Nia, please." "When you are a homeowner, Marcus, you get leeway," I explained, unfolding the bright yellow sheet. "When you are a homeowner, the bank has to go through a lengthy foreclosure process. It takes months, sometimes years. But when you are just a tenant on a standard commercial lease agreement, the rules are very different." I held the document up, ensuring the bold black letters at the top were perfectly legible. "Notice of eviction." I read aloud, my voice echoing crisply in the morning air. "You have not paid your rent in 60 days, Marcus. Your designated trust account has been flagged for insufficient funds for 2 consecutive months. You bypassed your housing obligations so you could buy Jasmine a diamond tennis bracelet and book luxury hotel rooms. You breached the terms of your lease agreement. You cannot evict me!" Tara shrieked, stepping forward to defend her brother. "This is his home. You cannot just throw him out on the street. He has rights." "He has a 24-hour notice to vacate, Tara," I corrected her sharply. "I filed the paperwork 3 days ago, the moment his second payment bounced. The grace period is officially over. By handing me those divorce papers yesterday, he made it very clear that our personal relationship is terminated, which means I have absolutely no obligation to show him any leniency as a landlord." I stepped forward and pressed the yellow eviction notice flat against Marcus's chest, right over his rapidly beating heart. He did not try to push it away. He just stood there, utterly defeated, holding the physical proof of his absolute ruin. "The county sheriff will be here tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp." I informed him, my tone purely transactional. "They will change the locks. They will secure the perimeter. And if you are still standing on this property when they arrive, you will be arrested for criminal trespassing." Marcus looked down at the yellow paper, his eyes brimming with tears of pure humiliation. "Nia, please," he whispered, his voice breaking completely. "Where am I supposed to go? I have no money. My accounts are overdrawn. Jasmine left me. I have nothing. I looked at the broken man who had confidently ordered me out of my own home just 24 hours ago. He was begging for mercy from the black woman he had tried to discard like trash. "You can go exactly where you told me to go, Marcus," I replied, my expression devoid of any sympathy. "You can pack your sensible clothes and whatever cheap trinkets you brought into this marriage. But remember the terms of your eviction. You are not allowed to take any fixtures. You cannot remove the appliances. You leave the keys on the bare counter." I turned my back on him, walking toward my sleek black Range Rover, parked at the end of the driveway. Beatrice was sobbing uncontrollably now, leaning heavily on Tara for support. Her golden child, the successful Wall Street executive, was about to be homeless. The perfectly curated facade of their elite family was burning to the ground, and there was not a single drop of water left to put out the fire. Connor was already walking quickly toward his own car, pulling his keys from his pocket. He wanted to get as far away from this disaster as possible before anyone started asking questions about his own financial crimes. But I was not finished with Connor. I had promised a full house cleaning, and I never leave a job half done. I stopped at the door of my car and looked back at the driveway. "Connor." I called out, my voice slicing through the sound of Beatrice's weeping. "Do not leave just yet. We still need to discuss your innovative offshore investment strategies." Connor froze mid-step, his hand trembling as he gripped his car keys. He slowly turned to face me, the terror in his eyes completely unmasked. Marcus was already destroyed, but the real financial reckoning for the rest of this toxic family was just about to begin. Connor froze mid-step, his hand hovering just inches above the chrome door handle of his imported luxury sedan. The heavy metal keys slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the concrete driveway with a sharp, distinct clink that echoed in the sudden quiet. He stood there with his back to me, completely paralyzed by the realization that I knew his darkest secret. For 5 years, Connor had played the role of the benevolent white savior in our family. He had married Tara and immediately positioned himself as the ultimate financial authority, treating the rest of us like we were hopelessly uneducated about wealth. He loved to stand in my kitchen sipping craft beer and lecturing Marcus about market volatility. He loved to pat Beatrice on the shoulder and assure her that he was protecting her legacy. He had built an entire persona around being the smartest, most sophisticated man in the room. Now that persona was shattering into a million jagged pieces on my driveway. He slowly bent down to retrieve his keys, forcing a strained, hollow chuckle as he straightened up. He turned to face me, attempting to paste his signature arrogant smirk back onto his pale, sweating face. "I do not have time for this nonsense," Nia Connor said, his voice pitching slightly higher than normal. His eyes darted nervously toward Tara and Beatrice before snapping back to me. "You just initiated a highly traumatic domestic dispute. You humiliated your husband, and you are clearly experiencing a manic episode. I have a 9 a.m. conference call with a major client, and I am not going to stand here and entertain your hysterical conspiracy theories. Tara, get in the car. We are leaving." Tara took a hesitant step toward her husband, but she did not open the passenger door. She stopped in the middle of the driveway, her eyes narrowed. She had spent the last hour watching me systematically dismantle her brother's life with flawless precision and irrefutable documentation. She knew I did not make empty threats. "Connor, what is she talking about?" Tara asked, her voice tight with growing suspicion. "What offshore investments?" Connor waved his hand dismissively, refusing to look his wife in the eye. "It is nothing, Tara. She is just throwing out financial buzzwords she heard on the news to sound intimidating. She is a decorator. She does not know the difference between a mutual fund and a checking account. Now get in the car." I did not let him open his door. I closed the distance between us in 3 long strides, stepping directly into his personal space. I slammed my hand flat against the driver's side window, right over the sleek tinted glass. The loud thud made Connor flinch and step back, his shoulder hitting the side mirror. "You are not going anywhere, Connor," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You are not going to run away and start shredding documents in your home office. You are going to stand right here in the bright morning sunlight and explain to your wife and your mother-in-law exactly what you did with the $600,000 they trusted you to protect." Beatrice, who had been weeping over Marcus's ruined life on the front porch, suddenly stopped crying. The mention of that specific dollar amount acted like a bucket of ice water thrown directly into her face. That was her entire life savings. That was the money her late husband had left her. The money she relied on to maintain her pristine socialite image at her elite church gatherings. She pushed past Marcus and marched down the porch steps, her tweed suit rustling aggressively as she hurried down the driveway. $600,000. Beatrice demanded, her voice shrill and trembling with a brand new kind of terror. Connor, look at me right now. That is the exact balance of my retirement portfolio. What have you done with my money? Connor was sweating profusely now. Dark, wet patches were spreading rapidly under the arms of his expensive blue dress shirt. He tugged at his collar, looking like a man gasping for air in a vacuum. Beatrice, you need to calm down, Connor stammered, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. Your money is perfectly safe. It is in a highly diversified growth portfolio. The market is just experiencing a minor correction right now. Nia is completely misinterpreting a standard reallocation strategy because she lacks the educational background to comprehend institutional wealth management. She is just trying to tear this family apart because she is angry about the divorce. I laughed, a sharp, cutting sound that sliced right through his pathetic gaslighting. A minor correction, I repeated, keeping my hand planted firmly on his car door to ensure he could not escape. That is a fascinating way to describe federal wire fraud, Connor. Tell me, does your compliance officer at the brokerage firm know about your minor correction? Because I am fairly certain that transferring your mother-in-law's conservative blue-chip stocks into an unregistered shell company based in the Cayman Islands violates a few dozen regulations established by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Tara gasped, stepping closer to me. Cayman Islands. Tara repeated, her eyes wide with mounting horror. Connor, you told me you moved Mom's money into a low-risk domestic bond fund. You swore to me it was untouchable. Connor shot a look of pure venom at me, but he quickly turned his attention back to his wife, desperate to regain control of his primary enabler. Tara, please listen to me, he begged, his voice cracking. You know how these alternative investments work. To maximize yields, you have to explore emerging global markets. It is an exclusive opportunity. I was doing this to build our family's generational wealth. I was protecting her assets from domestic inflation. You have to trust me, Tara. I am a licensed fiduciary. You are a licensed thief, I corrected him sharply, my voice echoing loudly across the concrete. You did not move her money to protect it from inflation. You moved it because your personal crypto portfolio tanked last October. You were facing massive margin calls, and you needed liquid cash immediately to cover your own catastrophic losses before your firm found out you were trading on leverage. You stole from a grieving widow to save your own skin. Beatrice let out a strangled cry, clutching her pearl necklace so tightly the string dug violently into her neck. She looked at the white son-in-law she had practically worshipped for years, the man she had constantly compared me to, the man she had paraded around her social circles as the ultimate financial savior. You stole from me, Beatrice shrieked, stepping aggressively into his personal space. You looked me in the eye at Sunday dinner, and you told me my future was secure. Where is it, Connor? Where is my money? Connor was completely trapped. He was boxed in by his car on one side and a furious mother-in-law on the other. His arrogant facade melted away entirely, leaving behind a pathetic, panicked coward. It is not gone, he pleaded, his eyes darting wildly around the driveway. It is just temporarily tied up in digital assets. The tokens are locked in a staking protocol. As soon as the market rebounds, the value will double, Beatrice, I swear to you. I will get it all back. I just need a little more time. Tara stared at the man she had married, her expression shifting from shock to absolute disgust. You lost it, Tara stated, her voice dropping into a deadened, hollow tone. You took my mother's life savings and you gambled it away on fake internet money. We are ruined. You ruined us. I crossed my arms over my silk blazer, watching the devastating realization crush the life out of them. They had spent the entire morning standing in my kitchen, judging me, belittling my career, and cheering for my eviction. Now they were standing in my driveway, realizing that the very foundation of their wealth had been hollowed out by the man they trusted most. But I was not quite finished. A crime of this magnitude required accomplices, and I knew exactly who had held the door open for the thief. I turned my head and looked back up at the front porch. Marcus was still sitting on the top step, his head resting against his knees, completely broken by the loss of his mansion and his mistress. "Marcus!" I called out, my voice commanding the attention of everyone in the driveway. "Why do you not come down here and join the family meeting?" I think Beatrice would love to hear exactly how Connor managed to bypass the security protocols on her bank accounts without triggering a single fraud alert. Marcus slowly lifted his head, his eyes bloodshot and wide with renewed terror. He frantically shook his head side to side, silently begging me to stop. Connor whipped his head around, glaring at his brother-in-law. "Shut your mouth, Marcus!" Connor hissed, his voice dripping with desperate menace. "Do not say a word." But I was holding the microphone, and I was dictating the script. "You see, Beatrice," I said, turning back to my former mother-in-law. "Connor is a stockbroker, but he did not have the internal authorization to wire $600,000 out of your primary banking institution. He needed an inside man. He needed a senior wealth manager with top-tier executive clearance to approve the transfer and sign off on the fraudulent documentation, claiming the move was fully authorized by the account holder." Beatrice slowly turned around to look at her golden child. The son she had worshipped, the son she had praised as the pride of the family. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling with a heartbreak so profound it almost commanded pity. "Tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not help him steal my money." Marcus could not speak. He just sat on the porch, shivering in his expensive, dusty suit, refusing to meet his mother's eyes. His silence was the loudest confession anyone could have asked for. I took a slow step back from Connor's car, giving them all the space they needed to tear each other apart. The final piece of the puzzle had been locked into place, and the explosion was imminent. I reached into the inner pocket of my silk blazer one final time. I pulled out a single, neatly folded bank statement and held it out in the space between us. Tara snatched it from my hand before Connor could even twitch. She frantically scanned the highlighted lines, her eyes widening as she processed the exact financial trail of her mother's ruined future. "Look at the transfer authorization at the bottom of the page, Tara," I instructed, my voice slicing through the heavy morning air. "Read the name of the executive who manually overrode the internal fraud protection alert on your mother's account." Tara's hands shook violently as she held the paper. "Marcus Vance," she whispered, reading the signature line aloud. "Marcus approved the wire transfer to Apex Global Holdings." Beatrice let out a guttural, devastating wail. She collapsed onto the concrete driveway, the pristine knees of her cream tweed suit scraping against the harsh pavement. Her own flesh and blood had sold her out. But the betrayal was far more calculated than a simple signature. "He did not just approve the transfer out of family loyalty," Beatrice Forster said, looking down at her trembling form. "Connor needed an inside man at the bank to bypass the compliance department. And Marcus desperately needed liquid cash to keep his 26-year-old intern completely dazzled by his fake wealth. So they struck a very lucrative deal. Connor moved your $600,000 into his offshore shell company, and he immediately wired a $50,000 consulting fee right back into Marcus's personal checking account." Marcus buried his face in his hands, letting out a loud, pathetic sob from the porch. $50,000, I repeated, letting the number sink into the minds of everyone present. Does that specific amount sound familiar to anyone here? It should, because that is exactly how much Marcus spent over the last 4 months on luxury hotel suites, designer handbags, and a very specific diamond tennis bracelet for Jasmine. He literally financed his secret second life using his own mother's retirement fund. The absolute depravity of the situation hung over the driveway. Beatrice looked at Marcus with a mixture of absolute heartbreak and pure, unadulterated hatred. "You stole my life," she screamed at him, her voice cracking under the weight of his betrayal. "I gave you everything. I bragged about you to my entire congregation. I defended you and you sold my future to buy jewelry for a tramp. Connor tried to inch his way toward the driver's side door again, but Tara suddenly spun around and shoved him hard against the car. You disgusting piece of garbage, she shrieked, hitting his chest with the crumpled bank statement. You ruined my family. You stole from my mother to cover your own gambling losses. I am filing for divorce, Connor. I am taking everything you have left. Connor could not even formulate a defense. He just stood there, pinned against his luxury sedan, completely exposed as a fraud and a thief. Marcus remained curled in a pathetic ball on the top step of the porch, unable to face the total destruction he had orchestrated. The elite, sophisticated family that had spent 5 years treating me like an uneducated peasant was now rolling in the dirt, completely dismantled by their own insatiable greed. Beatrice finally snapped. The elegant church-going matriarch let out a sound of pure feral rage and scrambled up from the concrete driveway. She lunged directly at the porch, throwing herself onto Marcus. Her manicured hand slapped violently against his chest and shoulders as she screamed about her stolen future. Marcus tried to shield his face, but he was too weak and too broken to fight back against his own mother's devastation. Down in the driveway, Tara yanked her diamond wedding ring off her finger and threw it forcefully at Connor's chest. It bounced off his sweat-soaked shirt and clattered onto the pavement. I am calling my lawyer right now, Tara shrieked, stepping away from him as if he were radioactive. I am taking the house, the cars, and sole custody. You are going to rot in federal prison, Connor. The pristine suburban morning had devolved into an absolute war zone. They were completely tearing each other apart, their fake loyalty incinerated by the very greed they had worshipped. I turned my back on the chaos and walked toward my sleek black Range Rover. My heels clicked rhythmically against the pavement, a steady drumbeat signaling the end of my performance. Nia, please wait. The desperate, pathetic plea scraped against the concrete. I stopped and looked over my shoulder. Marcus had crawled off the bottom step of the porch, his expensive trousers tearing against the rough pavement. He dragged himself across the driveway, reaching out with shaking hands to grab the hem of my silk trousers. Please, Nia, he begged, sobbing openly as he clung to the fabric. Please do not give those bank statements to the FBI. They will put me away. I will lose my licenses. I will go to federal prison. Please, I am begging you. I will do anything. I looked down at the man who had brought a 26-year-old intern into my kitchen just yesterday. The man who had ordered me to pack my cheap trinkets and get out. I calmly reached down and firmly pried his trembling fingers off my clothing. I stepped back, looking at the magnificent hollowed-out mansion behind him. Enjoy this empty house, Marcus, I said, my voice completely devoid of mercy. It looks exactly like your personality. I opened my car door, climbed into the plush leather driver's seat, and started the engine. I did not look back in the rearview mirror as I drove through the wrought iron gates, leaving them to face the authorities, the crippling debt, and the absolute destruction they had brought upon themselves. I took a slow sip of my robust Cabernet, letting the rich vintage warm my throat. The Atlanta skyline glitters beautifully through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my brand-new corner office. It has been exactly 1 year since that morning. The federal investigation moved incredibly fast when presented with a neatly organized folder of internal wire transfers. Marcus is currently serving a 4-year sentence in a federal correctional facility for financial fraud. Connor was stripped of his brokerage licenses and is facing his own extensive legal battles while navigating a brutal divorce from Tara. Beatrice lost her country club memberships and was forced to move into a modest, subsidized apartment. As for me, I just cut the ribbon on the 3rd regional branch of Aura Luxe Staging and Procurement. My business has tripled its revenue, and I have never felt more powerful or more at peace. Sometimes clearing the toxic energy out of your life requires more than just walking away. Sometimes you have to strip the illusion down to the studs. Because occasionally the very best way to clean up your entire life is to simply empty the house.